Hello there, and welcome to Lesson 3 on Introduction to Game Maker Studio 2, a course that was created for the students at Saturday Academy. I am Will Patil, the instructor for this course, and today we are going to be dealing with collision detection and animation. So let's get started. Now, one thing before I start, there's just one error that I brought into the scene right here. You may notice that things are a little bit stretched out. My character looks a little taller. These are more like ellipses rather than circles, as opposed to my room where that's not what my character and these things actually look like. So let's see what may be going on right there. Now, essentially, my game and my sprites are all created the way they should be. They're just not being viewed properly. So that tells me there's something wrong with my camera settings. So if I look down here in this properties under room main, I'm going to expand this window here. Just go right above where it says properties room main, and there's arrow shows up, and I can make that a little bigger. And if I go up at the top, you know, in my room settings, and specifically under the viewports and cameras, viewports are enabled, and viewport 0 is visible as before. And yeah, here's my object following as the player with a border around it. That's why the screen follows the player around. Not really dealing with these speeds at the moment. And you'll notice that there's some camera properties and there's some viewport properties. And they have different values in each of these right now. And what's causing the character to get stretched out is that the ratios in the width and height are not the same as the ratios between the width and height on the viewport. So one easy fix right now is I'll just make it a square. That makes the math nice and easy. It's just, you know, one-to-one kind of relationship. So if I run this now, then the proportions should be like what I'm showing here. So I'm going to save. And there we go. It looks a little bit more like the way it should. Now, let's go through these properties right here a little bit more in depth as to what each of them are. And, you know, rather than giving a technical explanation as to what they are, because you can just look at the documentation for that. You know, if you just search for Game Maker and type in viewport properties. But I think the best way to get a real intuitive sense as to what all these numbers mean is to change them. So in viewport properties, I'm going to change this to 500 by 500 for the width and height. So let's see what happens now. Okay, you'll see that everything has gotten smaller. The character is still taking up the same proportion of the screen, but the screen has gotten much smaller. Okay, now let's see what happens if I keep the viewport back to where it was at 1000 by 1000, which you may remember, just in case you've forgotten, looks like this. And now I'm going to change the camera properties to, let's say, 600 by 600. And a thing you may notice when I change the camera properties, this white box just got a lot bigger. And now my character looks much smaller. The screen is just as big as it was before. And actually what happened is my character hasn't gotten smaller. I'm seeing more of the map view, and my character's the same size, but because the screen has gotten bigger, my character looks smaller by comparison. You may also note that because we're looking at a bigger section of screen, it's getting closer to the edge over here before the screen starts moving around with it. So if I wanted it to keep the player stuck in the center, then I would need to increase these borders a little bit more, because I'm working with some larger numbers. Now let's see what happens if I'm going to close this and decrease both of them by half. 300. Let's set in a 300 here and a 300 by height, and then a 500 width and height. So this is decreasing or changing both the camera and the viewport. Save that and hit play. And now it's a smaller screen, and the player is taking the same proportion of it as they had initially when it was 600, 600, 1,000, 1,000, or what I had before. Now, one last thing to look at is, say I double the width on both. The width on both the camera and on the viewport. And here's the box. And now this also looks fine. It's still not stretched out, but now the screen is wider than it is high. Twice as wide, in fact. And so what's been in common with all of these values that I've entered in all these little tests that I've made, is that the ratio of width to width in camera and viewport is the same as the ratio between height to height on camera and viewport. So this is, right now the width is 60% of this, and this height is 60% of this. Once you change things so that this doesn't match, so let's say if I made this 250, now this is going to be 60% of this width, and this is going to be 50% of this height. So it's going to look stretched in one direction or the other. So sometimes you might want that. You might want to create a sort of stretched look to your scene for one reason or another, or maybe you were creating some kind of special effect and changing these values dynamically. But for the most part, you're going to want to keep these proportional. So I'm going to go back to some other values. I'll just go with, let's say, 400 by 400 and 800 by 800. And let's see what that looks like, and if it's fine, I'll just move along. Yeah, that looks good enough. I kind of like the size of the screen and the size of the character and what portion of it they're taking up. The borders are fine too. So I'm just going to leave it here. Also, you may have noticed that my character is able to walk off the screen in that direction. That's because I've gotten to the edge of the room, and the player, there's nothing stopping the player from leaving the room. However, the camera cannot leave the room because it's just unspecified what's going on up here. So that's what happens when your character leaves the space. All right, so that's enough little messing around with the editor, just in case you had gotten caught up with that. Sometimes that can be a tricky to find error that throws people off. Anyway, time to go into some collision detection. Now, first let's talk a little about what my strategy is going to be. I'm going to specify, let's go with like the edges of the room, as being marked for being impassable. That's the concept. I have a object, I'm going to have an object that's impassable, and I'm going to tile that all over the map. Well, not tile, because I'm going to be placing objects. And that's, what's impassable is going to be separate from the images that are impassable. So I might put an impassable object here and have it overlay on top of all of these brown circles. But these are going to be separate things. The brown circle is not a collider. There's going to be a collider layered on top of it. And the purpose for that is so that the same collider can be used for a lot of different visual things. It also opens the possibility of having like a secret door, like a wall that you can just walk right through. And we'll see more of that as we actually make the colliders. So to start with, I just mentioned that there's going to be some kind of object that is the impassable area, so I'll start with creating that object. So go into Objects, so right here, right-click, Create Object, and I'm going to call this Object, and I'll just call it Collider. Okay, and that's it for now. Now, in my object player, now you might be thinking that I'm going to need to add an event and then go to collision and then look for collider. We'll be using something like that in the future, but instead I'm going to use a slightly different process. What I am going to do is I'm going to have to get what direction the character is moving on every single frame and see if the direction they're moving is going to take them on top of a collider. And if that happens, push them back so that they don't go onto the collider, so that they stop. So I'm going to Object Player, and since this is going to be happening every single frame, I'm going to use an add event step and a regular step. Begin step, end step is going to have basically the same effect. I really only like to use begin and end step if I have multiple step events in a character and I want to control their execution order. Most of the time, just regular step is going to be all that you need. So I've created a step event. Again, this is on my player. And I am going to check for a collision with the collider at a particular point. So, alright, I can't remember right off the top of the head where to search in all this long list of different actions, so I'll just start typing collision, and oh hey, look, I got a whole section for collisions right here. So let's see. If object at place. Okay, so check if an instance overlaps one or more instances of a specific object in position. That sounds good. Let's bring that in. Okay, so a collision involves two things. It takes two things to collide. The thing that's moving, that's checking for the collision, and the thing that it's colliding with. Now, the thing that's looking for the collision is the player, because this action is inside of an event that belongs to this player. So that's taken care of for us already. It's implied. This field is what the player is looking for. So I'm going to just go into objects right here where it says no one. Look at this down arrow right here, and click this object collider. So I've selected that object collider. And now, I'm going to type in something here in this X field. Just type in HSPEED, and you'll see that this is a built-in variable, hspeed. This gets the horizontal speed of whatever object that it's being used in the context of. So this is going to find the horizontal speed of the player every single frame. Now, and also, yeah, the same thing for the UI, except now it's going to be V speed for vertical speed. And again, this is a built-in variable. I don't have to define it anywhere. GameMaker just knows what that means. Now, I'm looking for an object at a place, and I'm giving it two numbers. Now, this is going to be something like, okay, my player is moving to the right at a speed of 3. H speed, this is going to become 3, and this will be 0. If I'm moving to the left, this is going to be -3. This will be 0. If I'm moving up, this will be 0. And this will actually be -3, because up and down is reversed in a really weird way in GameMaker. I don't know why they don't just use Cartesian conventions, but whatever. So that's actually no good right now, because that is always going to find a pixel right about here in the room, because the room starts at 0, 0 up here. So it'll be like somewhere around in this area every single time. So I'm going to tick these relative checkboxes on H speed and V speed. So that's what this relative does, is it's going to take these values and add them to the player's current position. So if in the room my character is here and I'm going to the left, then it is going to look 1, 2, 3 pixels to the left in its checking for this collision. Okay, so I'm going to just find whatever speed that I'm moving on both the horizontal and the vertical axis, and then just look ahead and, from where I am, based on the speed that I'm moving, and see if there is an instance of this collider there. And then, okay, so, well, just an if statement doesn't really do much. We need to say what happens when this if statement executes, and this is going to be super easy. I am going to use this jump to position, or jump to point, that is, and drag that right here. Make sure to put this on the right side where this bar shows up here, not below, because so it's going to be indented, and so this will only happen if this evaluates to true. If this evaluates to false, I'll just skip ahead. And then I'm going to jump to point negative H speed relative to the player, negative V speed, also relative. So again, if I'm moving to the left and there's a collider right here, then I get pushed back right to where I am. And so I'm actually not preventing the player from moving. I'm just allowing them to move into the collider and then pushing them right back to where they were. And so these two movements will cancel each other out, and they will appear not to have moved at all. Yeah, I guess the next thing is to actually place some of these colliders in the scene. Now, and this gets to something actually I forgot about. This actually is going to need a sprite. Sprite will, for one thing, define how big it is, and will also be very useful in being able to place them in the scene, to know where we've put them already. So I'm going to create a new sprite. Again, I'm in my object collider, and rather than create a sprite and assign it, I can just click this little plus to create a new sprite. And I'm going to rename this, so I'm not calling it Sprite 5. I can just rename it right up here. I'm going to call it SPR Collider, and I'll just add in box. That's just a little preview as to what the shape is going to be. And let's see, so I have enough control over it. Let's see, what's my grid? It's 32 by 32. So I'm going to make my Sprite Collider box. I'm going to change its size. So I'm in the sprite, click on this resize sprite option, and then type in 32 by 32, and apply. Okay, so that's going to shrink down my sprite. Now I'm going to draw on it a little bit, so I'm going to double click here, and I'm going to give this a kind of a transparent red color. Pick red right here, and let's see, if I paint this, that's a little too red. I want it to be transparent. So I'm going to modify this red because I don't really see a transparent red over here. I'm going to click this red icon, and this brings up a color wheel where I can modify the color. So I'm going to set these to 0 and this to 255. And then I'm taking the alpha channel, and I'm going to lower this down. Now you'll see as I'm changing this, or as I change anything, this right preview window is going to be changing along with it. So 135, that looks pretty good. I'm going to leave it there, click OK, and now I have this kind of transparent red color here. And now with the fill tool, I'm going to fill this, and it's not filling. Okay, that's interesting. Let's see what happens if I just erase all this first. Alright, let's try this fill tool again. Okay, there we go. I guess for some reason I had to erase what was already there. So now I have this semi-transparent red. Now, going back into the object collider, I'm going to untick this visible box right here in my object properties, and untick that. So what this does, this visible controls whether the sprite is visible in the game. It does not, however, we still can, however, actually make it visible in the room view. So let's see, let's say I take some colliders, I'm just going to put one right here so that I can see it right off the bat. If I run this, so I can see this in the room, I can see where I've placed all of my colliders, but when I run the game, I can't see it. It's invisible. I'm going to delete that, click on it, press delete. Also make sure you're in the instances layer, otherwise this isn't going to work. So I'm going to start placing some colliders in my room. Now it's going to get really tedious to be dragging these all the time, so instead I'm going to hold the Alt key so that it just shows up by my cursor, and I can just click and just drag along and just place a bunch of them at once. And I kind of got lost there somehow. Alright, let's try that again. Click there, hold Alt, and I can just drag like a line, and there we're good. And now hold Alt again, drag a line over there, and I'm just kind of resetting this so that if I make an error, it'll be very easy to press Control-Z and fix the mistake. Okay, and Collider and Alt, and there we go. So now I have a nice full room, and actually I'm going to put some around all these brown dots as well. So I can just click, hold Alt, and just click on each of them, so that these brown circles will also be impassable, as well as the full room. That'll prevent me from leaving. So let's see what happens when I run the game. Okay, I move around, and I walk into this brown thing, and I stop. I'm not able to move. I can go this way, but there was a little bit of a problem, which is that when I run into it, I can't get away. I'm trying to go to the right, and I'm stuck. And I'm also apparently stuck on up and down as well. So this may or may not be happening to you. The cause of it, and actually another place where this will likely come up, is even more common, is when I go into a corner. Like if I run the game and I go to the top and that stops and that works great, then I go and hit the right. Now I'm in this kind of invisible corner, and now I'm totally stuck. So what's happening there, or the way that you fix this, is you go into your object player. Actually, no, sorry, not that one. Go into your Sprite player, and we're going to go through this for all of them. You'll notice, if you go in here, in your Sprite, go to the collision mask and open this up. And this will show you the collision mask for the Sprite. You'll see this kind of darkened gray area is the part of the Sprite that can actually collide. It's currently set to an automatic rectangle. These are some like default settings, and these are its dimensions. So it goes from pixel 11 from the left and ends at 48, and it goes from 0 up at the top all the way down to 63 at the bottom. Now, if I look at some of my other sprites and watch these numbers, open up the collision mask. Yeah, so 0 to 63, 11 to 48. I think that might actually be the same. Let's check out the left. Yes. So now if I look at the left, you'll notice that the collision mask is in a slightly different place. Instead of 11 to 48, it's 15 to 52. And 0 to 63 over there. And then walking up, let's see, what do we got? Yes, it's the same 11 to 48. So what happens, or what's causing the problem, is that when my character, moves over here, and it's moving along, and it runs into something, and there's a collision. Okay, it collides and moves back a little bit. Then it turns around when I try to go. So obviously I can't go to the left anymore because there's a wall there. But what happens when I try to go to the right? Well, it's going to look at where I am currently. It's going to go only just like 3 or like 5 pixels away. But because the collision mask has shifted, because they aren't centered in the same place, there's still an overlap in the colliders. It's just going to be the far edge over here is colliding with the edge of this collider because it's flipped around. So the fix for that is to make sure that all of your bounding boxes on all the variations of the sprite, anything that can change between, is consistent. Now, there are a couple of ways this could be done. One is we can just move the collider manually. So I just go from, in this left one, switch it from automatic to manual, and set this to 11 to 48 so that it matches all of the others, and then I can go into the sprite and just move it over a little bit. So let's see, I'm just take this selection tool and drag it over here, and then just move. I'm pressing the arrow key to move it over a couple of frames, and now let's take a look at whether that looks about right. Let's see, sprite player left. And let's see, go into our collision mask. Yeah, that looks all right. The collision mask lines up with the player, and all the other ones, 11, 48, 0, 43, 11, 48, 0, 63, 11, 48, 0, 63, and 11, 48, 0, 63. So that should work. Now, if you don't want to go through that tedious process of making sure everything lines up, the other option that you have is to just make it easier on yourself and just say full image. So rather than making it the automatic anything, just full image, and just make sure that the same setting is applied to all of them. If you're using the full image and they're all the same size, then you don't have to mess around with sizings or putting numbers in. This will be much quicker. But since mine, all of them were pretty close, I just decided to go with a manual sort of thing. So I'm going to set that back to 11, 0, 48, and 63. And now let's see if my player still gets stuck. Okay, so now I'm able to hit that, and I move away from it. I can hit it in all different directions, and I never get stuck. Now let's go for the really tricky part. Let's see if I can hit the corner. And yes, I can. I can move along these walls and run into corners, and there's no problems at all. And that's actually all you really need for collision detection. Now, one additional thing I'm going to show you here. So currently, these colliders are all squares. And that may be all you need. You just put out a grid for the things that you want. But suppose that you want to have like angles. You want to have like a diagonal sort of thing going on. Maybe put in certain places to make your visuals match up a little better. So for that, I'm going to first need to create a sprite that is in the angle that I want. And actually, because I'm going to be creating several sprites that are very similar, I'm going to go to Sprites and add a group. And I'm going to call this Colliders. And put my Sprite Collider box in here. And now I'm going to take this box and hit Control D to duplicate it. And I'm going to start with upper right. Actually, I'll just call it up right. And and then also make sure on all these Sprite Colliders that your anchor is in the top left. Just a general rule of thumb for your anchors. Make sure any sprites that you're using for background or for colliders or anything that you're going to be tiling on your map is in the top left. And then anything that's a character, you're almost always going to want it in the middle center. There'll be exceptions for that, but by the time you get to that point, you'll hopefully understand it a little better. All right, so now I want to make a just kind of a angled sprite. So I'm just start by editing my image. All right, so to make this just be the top right section of this, I'm going to take this line tool and I'm going to go down all the way. Let's see, zoom out a little bit so I can see this full image in here, and drag a line from this corner all the way up to this corner. Actually, I'm going to pick a more visible color. So drag a line all the way across. There we go. And then paint the bottom section. This is what I want to cut out. Then I'm click this magic wand tool. Click here, and so now you'll see this kind of little lines, like dotted moving lines, all the way around this white section. And then I'm going to press the delete key, and that deletes all of this. So this is all going to be transparent. This is going to be visible. Next, going back into my full sprite view up here, I'm going to set the collision mask so it matches this shape. So I'm just going to go into collision mask mode and actually go back to automatic, and then for type select precise slow. And this is the slow means that collision detection that's not on regular shapes is a little bit more computationally expensive, but honestly that's not really a big deal for the game. If you get lag in a two-dimensional top-down thing on a modern computer, there's something else that's probably wrong with your game. Alright, so that's created my sprite that's just in the upper right. So now I'm going to copy and paste this so that it is in all the other directions, because I don't want it just upright, I want it all the others. So I'm going to right-click here and duplicate, and I'm going to call this upper left, and create another one. Let's see, I'm going to call this down right, and then duplicate this and make it be down left. And now I'm going to actually change these so that they match their descriptions. So for my upper left, I can just double click on the sprite here, and so I can go into image and mirror and flip it. So now it's in the upper left. For down right, I go into the image here, click image and flip. So now it's in the down right. Now for the collider, down left, I've clicked here, now go into this to edit the image. Now I can click image, and I'm going to mirror it, and I am also going to flip it. So now this is in the down left. Next, I need to create some objects that I'm going to assign to these sprites. So right click here, duplicate, and up left, duplicate again, down right, and duplicate again, down left. And next I'm going to change the sprites that each of these are assigned to. So in this upper left, I just select the sprite and go into colliders, and let's see, I got my down left, Oh, in case I didn't cover it earlier, if I skipped it over, there's some tricky things in filming this video. I've put these sprites into created a group, and then put these all in here, and done the same thing with the objects. So like create add group, and then I called it colliders, and then I just dragged all of these into that group. So if these were not in here, say I put this like that, like this, drag them into colliders. Okay. That's just a way of keeping things a little bit more organized as I get more and more objects in my scene. Alright, so that's upper left. So down right, select Sprite, colliders, and look for my down right. And oh, this is not correct. Yeah, that's still not correct. Upper left. There we go. And then finally, the down left. Actually, the down right next. Colliders, down right, and down left. Okay, so now I have a sprite and object of all 4 different directions that I can be. And I can place some of these in the scene, so I can put some of these in the corner. And so let's see, I've placed this upper right over here. I can place this upper. Did I still draw it wrong? That is frustrating. All right, upper left, colliders, upper left. Okay, there we go. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, good. Upper left. Bring that here, and then down left. Put that here. And down right, I put that here. And I can experiment with other places to put them as you like. I just put some nice corners around those edges. So now there's the issue of, how do I actually make the player know to collide these? Because as you may remember, in my object player on my step event, it's currently just looking for, actually, and this is wrong. It is looking for this object collider box. This is where I left off last time. And, well, this is the only object that's the object collider box. We would have to cut and paste this code and check again for upper right, upper left, down left, and this would be a lot of cut and pasting, and it'd be honestly kind of unwieldy. So I'm going to show you a little bit of a shortcut. I'm going to go into my colliders and create a new object, and I'm going to call this object collider base. And I don't need to do anything with this. I don't need to create a sprite. I don't need to add any events. Nothing. Now I'm just going to go into my object collider box and select this parent option right here. This will bring this window up, and then I click this where it says no object, colliders, object collider base. And I'm going to do the same thing for all these others. So for upper right, parent, collider base, upper left, parent, collider base, right, set parent to collider base, and same thing for left. Parent, object, colliders, collider base. Okay, next, in my step event right here, so instead of checking for object collider box, I'm instead going to check for this object collider base. And so now, if it runs, because this is the parent of all of these objects, running into this is like running into this. And so by just looking for this object collider base and having all these as a parent, the player can now run into any of these collider types. So now if I take my character and I put it over in the corner like that, actually this will be a little bit of an easier test than there, is I notice if I go up here and I move to the side, I run into a collider. I move down a little bit, I can move further, 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 and now I'm hitting that edge. So this kind of is a little test to see that those diagonal colliders are working. And the same thing would happen if I went to any of these other ones. Ooh, I didn't want that to rotate. So like if I put this down here and run the game, okay, I can go all the way over to the edge and then move over a little bit, and I can go farther down until I get to the bottom edge. Okay, so that's everything that you need to know for colliders. And if you want more fine-grained different types of colliders, maybe a rounded edge, then you just add more colliders, just draw your shape, make it a precise fit so that the mask matches the image that you're using for debugging, and then just set this collider base to be its parent. And then you don't need to change anything in the player because it's still it's just another child of the object collider base which it's looking for. So that's it for collisions. Again, it's just these 2 lines of code and then creating the colliders. Next, let's go into a bit of animation. So for that, animations occur in sprites. So if I go into my object sprite, currently I only have a single subsprite. I'm going to add some more by right-click, copy, paste, paste 3 of them, and I'm going to make a really simple animation right here. I'm just going to take my eraser tool and just in the second frame right here, just delete some of the character's leg, and then do the same thing for the other leg in this 4th frame over here. And then I'll do the same thing for all these other characters. So copy, paste, 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 second frame, delete erase part of one leg, go to the other, and erase part of the other leg. Let's see, to the right. Okay, this one's done already, and I'll just repeat for the rest. I think I'll speed up the video here. Okay, and lastly for up, copy, paste, 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 delete the left leg, and delete the right leg. Okay. Now I run this, and I see my character is playing this walking animation. But there's a couple of problems with it. First of all, it's playing all the time, and I want it to stop when I take my fingers off the key. I also notice that the down arrow I didn't delete a little bit. So go to this down and right here, and yeah, erase that. Okay, save. So the reason it's constantly playing is its animation speed is always set to 1. So if I can preview this, and I can see it playing here, by the way. So I need to be able to change its animation speed. And the first question, whenever you're adding any feature into GameMaker, is think about when it happens. Well, it's when we lift a key up. And when we lift a key up, we'll notice we're always executing this stop check script. So that means the change needs to happen in stop check. And we can see as we've created this set speed is happening if we get to this end condition down here, we haven't exited early. So now I'm just going to set my speed right here. So if I type in animation, here we go, we have set animation speed right here. I set my animation speed to 0. So let's see what happens when I run this. And I move and I let go, and then my animation speed stops, and it stays stopped forever. Well, that's because we need to set the animation speed back to 1. Again, the question is, when does that happen? Well, we have our move script right here. Every time we move, we're going to be calling this move, whether it's from stop check or whether it's from a key press. So we can just set our animation speed right back to 1 right here. So let's say find it, animation speed 1. And let's see what happens. Okay, so I start moving, I let go, I stop, I start moving again, I let go, I stop, and it's working correctly. Except there are 2 little edge case problems. First of all, you may have noticed when I started running the game, I was already walking, even though I hadn't pressed any keys. And second, sometimes I stop with a foot in the air, and I want to always stop at the 0th frame, or where my feet are planted. So let's start with the starting condition. Well, again, you start with when does this happen? Well, at the very beginning of the game, so that means in the onCreate event, and we just set the animation speed to 0. And that should fix the start of game. So at the very start, I'm not animated. Once I start walking, the feet start moving, let go, and that happens. Now let's deal with this thing where I sometimes stop with a foot in the air. Well, if we take a look at the way I've created these sprites, I've been very consistent with having this 0th sprite, or this very first sprite, as being the foot planted. It's something that'll work for idle position. So if I walk right, I start here, walk left, I start here, walk up, my first frame looks like this. So I can assume that no matter which direction I'm going, I want to go to this very first frame in my set. So that means I can just go into Move, and let's see, this is going to be working with Sprites, so I'll start typing in Sprites, and let's see, oh, here we go, Set Sprite. That's the one that we need. And so Set Sprite lets you pick a sprite to change to, and also which frame to go to. And animation speed's already taken care of. Actually, I think I am in the wrong place. The setting is when we stop. So actually, it's back in stop check. So right where we have the set animation speed, go to Sprite, set sprite. It's here. So, sorry, it's in the stop check at the very end where we're setting the speed and animation speed to 0. And I want it to be at frame 0. Now the tricky part here is that the sprite, we can't just pick a particular sprite here because this could be called from any of the directions. We don't really know what direction we're facing in the script because it's used in a lot of different places. So, well, we've already dealt with this already with arguments. Just type in argument 0. Now you might be wondering, well, hey, you've used argument 0 before. Not in this script. Whenever you're creating arguments, you start at 0 and you count upwards, and then you start over again whenever you're working in a new script or event. So I'm going to go with argument 0 and frame 0. Now I actually have to pass this argument in when I'm calling stop check. So let's look at where we are calling stop check. And if I remember correctly, that is on these key up events. Yes, so on key up left, I execute script stop check, and now I'm going to actually fill in this argument field with SPR player walk up, because that's the key command. Oh wait, no, that's not correct. I'm in left, so I want to go sprite player walk left. And actually, just to make this a little simpler, I'm going to copy that whole bit and then go into up, paste that in, say up, right, paste that in, right, okay, and I need a T there, and now down, paste that in, down. Okay, and now when I play the game, I can walk, and every single time I always stop with my feet on the ground. I start correctly, and everything about this is good, and I have my collisions with the walls and with the other things, and the camera's following correctly, and that is good. So we have, in this lesson, we have covered collisions of all sorts of types. We've covered animations, integrated that into our scene, and I've also covered some additional topics like the bounding boxes, again, so make sure that your bounding boxes match in your collision mask, and these left, right, top, down, to deal with that little edge case on some of those collisions. And we've also dealt with the room, making sure that it sizes correctly and doesn't get squished by making sure these width and heights are proportional to the width and heights between the camera and the viewport. So that is all for today. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.